All right, yes, guys, welcome to this webinar. My name is Barrister Okoye, and I am the manager partner at Sedge Attorneys. Now, our interest and passion is for us to help people, clients, businesses have an informed decision, and then as well stay compliant, and at the same time, help solve legal problems that anyone might have gotten themselves involved with. So that's what we do. Now, we're having this webinar on starting the business in Nigeria the right way, whether you're a foreigner or whether you're Nigerian. Now, 3 things I would like us to know before we get started is that this webinar is just for 30 minutes, okay? It's recorded and it's just for 30 minutes. If after 30 minutes, the time elapses and we haven't finished what we have for discussion, we may have to do another video, because I would want this video to be very concise so that everyone can really watch it in one sweep. And then secondly, it's the webinar, what we need to discuss. We're going to look at, there are 3 major things that we need to discuss in this webinar. I'm going to take you through on all of that. And then the third thing is I'll try to avoid using legal terms so that anybody can really understand me plainly without having so much to think about or, to look out for. And then, of course, if you find this video helpful, okay, try to follow us, like, comment, share, okay, so that we can know how, it was for you. Then, of course, you can contact us with any of the contact information we are seeing around this video. So let's get started. Now, 3 things we're looking at. First of all, the title of this webinar is Starting the Business in Nigeria the Right Way. Okay, the right way. And whether you're a foreigner or you are a Nigerian, okay, we're going to cover all of that. And then another thing also is the 3 things. There are 3 major things we're going to look at in this webinar. I'm going to be sharing my screen shortly, but the 3 things we'll look at is, firstly, we're going to look at businesses, the business structures in Nigeria according to the CAC, which the Company and Allied Matters Act, is actually contained in the Company and Allied Matters Act. And then secondly, also we'll be looking at the compliances that businesses may have to follow after incorporation. And then thirdly, we'll be looking at the step-by-step process, okay, a foreigner may have to go through, okay, to incorporate a business in Nigeria. So if you're ready, let's get started. All right, so let me be sharing my screen now. I'm going to be sharing my screen now, and we'll look through all of these details. Now, of course, if you've been planning on starting up a business, or rather starting up your business structure in Nigeria, maybe you're even a Nigerian diaspora, or you're a Nigerian, or you are a foreigner, then of course this video will so be helpful for you. So try not to miss out on any information. Okay, so let's look at this. Okay, now we're starting, or rather we have started. So let's go from the beginning. Now, it's a comprehensive guide to business structures and incorporation in Nigeria. Okay, that means according to the Company and Allied Matters Act, this is the law that strengthens business incorporation and operation in Nigeria. Remember, I'll try to be fast so that I can meet up with my 30 minutes time frame. Now, let's look at the business structure first of all in Nigeria. That means under the CAMA 2020. Now, what do we mean by business structure? First of all, there are different kind of businesses you can incorporate in Nigeria. Okay, we'll look at all of them. I'm going to make some explanation on every one of them. Okay, and then maybe if there's some kind of questions to really answer to, I think I will answer to them much later. But nonetheless, let's start with the structures. Now, the structures, there are different business structure you can incorporate, okay, in Nigeria. The first one is the business name. Now, with the business name actually has to do with being a sole proprietor, okay, or maybe okay, let's look at it here. A business, being a sole proprietor, or maybe you can even go into a partnership with some other people. But one thing you need to know about the business name is that it has no legal personality, okay? Of course, you're incorporating, you have a legal identity, but the business is not different from the person. That means the person has unlimited liability, which means that if the business incurs a debt or any kind of liability, you will be the one to pay from your pocket. If the business doesn't have the money to pay for it, you will be the one to pay for it from your pocket. Now, one thing about business name that you really will have to note is that in business name, right, you have it's like let's suppose maybe a freelancer. Okay, let's use a use case scenario to explain this. Let's suppose a freelancer. Okay, maybe the person has a remote or rather works for a company in Nigeria, or rather works for companies in Nigeria or maybe outside the country, but the person would want to maintain a legal status. Now, for some kind of people, okay, I'm not saying all freelancing must have to be that way, but for some kind of people, they may have to go into freelance. They may have to go into registering the business name for the purpose of having a legal identity. But just because you have a legal identity doesn't mean you are maybe the business is different from you. No, in a business, the business is not different from you. Now, one thing you need to know in business is that the business and the person has to be different. Okay, that's one thing about business, maintain a very good business structure. But when it comes to business name, it is not like that. A business name, I'm trying to emphasize on this so that you can know the difference between this and all other ones that we're going to go into. So in a business name has legal identity, but okay, the business is not different from the person. That means if I would sue the business, I'm actually suing the person that owns the business. Or if the business or the person will sue me, then the person is suing under his name, not the business name. Okay, so in a business name, the kind of people that could have a business name are maybe, like I said, freelancers. Okay, it's good that they can use it, or maybe someone who is trying to start out something. Okay, a business person who is trying to start out something. Okay, so maybe you're not so sure how this business will go. You can decide to use a business name, or maybe you started out the business you're doing, but it's actually in a small scale. You haven't yet upscaled. It's actually in that small scale, and yet you want to still have some legal identity to do some things. Maybe open up a bank account and some other legal transactions that you may want to do in the name of the business. You can go with business name. Now, so business name is actually good for some kind of people. Okay, that some kind of people is good for them to start it out, and maybe it's also easy to. Maybe you don't have so much funding to really do the other kind of company structure. You can actually start with the business name. Now, the business name is actually into two folds. You have the sole proprietor. That means one person can register. And then we have the second one too, where maybe you can get partners. Okay, you can have partners that would be involved, in the business, but it will exceed 20. However, no matter the number, the business still has unlimited liability. In other words, you can actually be sued in your name, and if the business suffers any liability, remember, the whole 20 persons will have to incur for that debt or liability, as it may be. Now, that is it for business name. The next one we're going to look at is the private company limited by shares. I would like to take that one before I go into limited partnership. Now, companies limited by shares, and then companies limited by shares. Now, in company limited by shares, you have private company limited by shares and you have public company limited by shares. Okay, so it's into two: private company and public company limited by shares. For a private company limited by shares, you're talking about maybe now. What does that mean? Shares. When it comes, so in this company limited liability company, this means that, first of all, that the company is different from the people. That means it has a legal personality. The business has a legal personality. However, the people are different entities from the business. That means the business is an entity on its own. That means it can sue in its name, or it can be sued in its name. And then also, the liability of the business is subject to what the business has. In other words, the shareholders, which are the members, the owners of the business, has no they can't if the business is liable, or maybe there's a kind of debt, or whatever damage the business suffers, the people, okay, has limited liability. In other words, their debts, their financing, their resource, their monies cannot be used to offset that. Okay, it's only what the business has that will be used to offset whatever damage, debt, liability that the business may incur. Now, another thing also to note in this business, in a limited company limited by shares, is that it's in two folds. You have the private company limited by shares, and you have the public company limited by shares. Now, what does this mean? The difference between the two is that in a private company limited by shares, the shares of the company is actually rather private to some individuals. Okay, the shareholder membership is not allowed by CAMA. Okay, that means the Company and Allied Matters Act, to exceed 50. Okay, so you can have many shareholders, but it should not exceed 50. Now, of course, this structure of business anyone could structure this business. Now, is a full-fledged business company structure that you can incorporate for your business. And it's, no matter the longevity of time you will be in that business, even beyond you, it can still, it stays afloat, it stays alive until maybe your children, your grandchildren, or anybody that may succeed you in the business. That means the succession too, is an integral part of this business. There is a part where the shareholders and then the structures involved in the business are actually construed, okay, in what we call the memorandum and article of association. Now, all of this thing that I just said, okay, it also applies to public company limited by shares. However, in a public company limited by shares, the shareholders are not limited. You can have as many shareholders as possible. Now, in this one, what it means is you went public. Your ownership is public to the people. That means you are bringing in a whole lot of people to join you in having ownership in the business. Being a shareholder means that you are a joint owner of that. That is what it actually means. Okay, that is what it actually means. You are actually a joint holder of the company. And then another thing also to note is that in a private company limited by shares, of course, there's something called dividends where the shareholders share dividends, and then even in a public company limited by shares, the same thing happens. So they have the same similarities, but the difference is one is private, limited to 50 shareholders, and the other is limited to, it's not limited at all, and you can have as many shareholders as possible. One important detail to also note in a private company limited by shares and a public company limited by shares is that the business now, this actually the usage of this kind of structure are mostly to people who already know this is the kind of business that they want to get into. Maybe you are into oil and gas, or you are into real estate, or you are into any kind of business. You already know that this business, you really want a very good and longevity of structures to build in the business. Then of course you can certainly go into the private company limited by shares or the public company limited by shares. Now another thing also are those two, maybe even if you are, maybe you just have an idea of a certain kind of business to do and you're thinking, okay, let me get started. Of course you can start with a private company limited by shares. Okay, it doesn't mean that you may have to start with business name, but you can start with a private company limited by shares. Under the Company and Allied Matters Act, one shareholder is enough, okay, to incorporate a private company limited by shares. But in a public company limited by shares, at least two shareholders. Okay, you must have at least two shareholders to go public, to incorporate a public company limited by shares. Now, of course, it helps also, this kind of business structure also helps you to also attract investments, grants, and some of that kind of funding that your business may need. And also, the business also comes with a certain kind of constitution the business will follow, the memorandum and article of association. So all of these details, I hope you really understand now the private company limited by shares and public limited company by shares. Then another thing also is that we're also going to be looking at limited partnership and limited. Now there are two other kind of structures that is not, they are the same, they are almost the same rather, should I say, but it's not mostly used in Nigeria, and quite a number of people don't even know that. The limited company LP and LLP, that means limited partnership and limited liability partnership. Now under the comma, you have these two, you can incorporate any of these two. Now let me explain what this means. In a limited partnership, the structure of the business is that the partners, that means it's also a company, but this time around is more of the partnership. That means two or more persons come together to do a business. But in a limited partnership, the partners are limited, okay, to the funding that they put in the business. Okay, the partners are, sorry, in a limited liability partnership, rather, the partners are limited to the funding that they put in the business. Okay, that means like a private company limited by shares or a public company limited by shares. Okay, the partners are actually limited to the monies they put in. Okay, so that means if anything happens to the business, okay, the damages or whatever debt or liability the business incurs will not affect them in any way. Okay, but in a limited partnership, okay, the limited partnership is in two folds. You have the general partnership, and then you have the investment partnership. Now, these two make up for limited partnership. What this means is that in a limited partnership, the partners are actually, the general partners, okay, actually has unlimited liability. In other words, if the business goes south, if anything happens to the business, they are liable from their own resource, okay, from their own finances. They have to maybe pay for any offset or debt or whatever the business may fit. But an investment partner in a limited partnership, okay, is not subject to that. Okay, he has a limited liability. In other words, the liability he has is subject to the investment that he puts in the business. Now, for this kind of business, who can start up this kind of business? Now, this kind of business actually good for, I'm talking about the limited partnership now. Limited partnership actually good for those who may have been in let's say somebody, Nigerian diaspora, a Nigerian diaspora and a Nigerian here, okay, in Nigeria, who are planning to go into a business, and then just a moment, and then so they usually, maybe someone, the person here, the person over there may want to put in some kind of big funding into the business, let's say like 20 million, 50 million into the business. However, the person here in Nigeria may have the skill to give, or the managerial or to run the managerial affairs. Okay, so that is possible, where somebody who has the skill for the business, or who can actually operate or manage the business, that person can be the general partner, while the investment partner can be someone who actually is overseas, maybe not necessarily overseas. The person can still be in Nigeria, but the person may not really be in the everyday to-day affairs of the company, of the business. So a limited partner, the person can actually be a limited partner, okay, for the business. So that is actually how it can work for a limited partnership. And then the second part is the limited liability partnership. Now, for a limited liability partnership, now in this regard, the partnership, remember, like I said, is limited to, or rather, the members, the owners of the business their liability is limited to the investment they put in the business, but usually it is a partnership. So anybody can come together to form a partnership and to do business. There's something I want to go back to: a private company limited by shares and a limited company limited by shares. Now, there's a part I did not say, which is also another structure too that you can also note: a private unlimited company, okay, a private unlimited liability company, and a public unlimited liability company. Now, for a private unlimited liability company, what it means, well, for the two in general, these are business structure. Like we talked about in limited liability company, okay, limited liability company by shares. What it simply means is that these two people have their actually a company, okay, but they have unlimited liability. In other words, anything that happens to the business will have to be offset. When you hear limited liability, what it means is that the liability of the business is subject to the investment of that business. Why unlimited liability? The business, or that the funding of the business, all of what the business would do, the operations is unlimited. In other words, it goes beyond the company. The people, the owners involved in the business are actually responsible, with their own monies, okay, in the business. So that means if the business cannot pay, they would also have to pay for whatever it is that happens. And although this structure is in Kama, but it is actually not so, you don't really find people doing this kind of incorporation. However, in the same way it happens in the private, that's also how it happens in the public. So there could be a public shares where people would own the business, and of course the public that would still own the business will be liable for whatever it is that happens to the business. That's beyond maybe those who are even controlling it. Okay, they'll still be liable. Their funding too would also be involved in the business. Now, this kind of business structure are actually good for maybe those who may want to show a very high extreme trust to people that see we are in the business and you can trust us. Why? Because our monies too are actually involved in the business if anything goes wrong. So it's not so obtainable, but it is actually part of the structure that you find under the CAMA, the Company and Allied Matters Act. Another structure too to also note, the final structures to also note is the company limited by guarantee and the incorporated trustees. Now, these two are together. I even like to take them two because they have some similarities. For example, like the private company limited by shares and the public company limited by shares, they are together. Then you have the private unlimited liability company and you have the public unlimited liability company. So they are together. Actually, a lot of similarities, but a little bit of difference. So here we also have, and then the limited partnership and also the limited partnership and the liability partnership. And many people don't even know about this, and yet it's under the CAMA. Then the third one, or rather, this next one I'm trying to talk about are actually incorporated trustees and company limited by guarantee. Okay, now let's look at this. Now, for incorporated trustees and company limited by guarantee, they are actually non-profit. Okay, they're established not for profit sharing. Okay, but nonetheless, anyway, whatever somebody may have to, for example, the owners, or rather, let me use the controllers of this kind of businesses. Okay, those who run the operation of this kind of businesses, they are actually subject to, for example, they have a constitution that governs the affairs of the organization. And remember, I said it's for non-profit. In other words, maybe, for example, it can be used for education, like, for example, the company limited by guarantee. We have a school, we're incorporating it under the company limited by guarantee, but it's not for profit. Everything that is made from the school will be used to run the school. So nobody owns anything at the end of the day. The same with an incorporated trustee. Nobody owns anything at the end of the day. However, the people who run the affairs of the organization are called trustees. And these trustees, they are actually entitled to some, not profit anyway, but they are entitled to some kind of course, anybody involved in the business are entitled to remuneration and some other kind of benefit that may come. However, the business is not on the ideal of making profit. So whether an incorporated trustee, whether a company limited by guarantee, no profit making, you can't make any profit, you can't declare profit, you can only declare maybe donations and some other things that may have come from different people and organization into the organization. Another thing is that company limited by guarantee requires the Attorney General consent, for that to happen. While an incorporated trustee does not require any consent at all. Two trustees or more can come together to form an incorporated trustee. Now, people who are involved or who can incorporate an incorporated trustee are maybe churches, mosques, any kind of association, or any kind of union or association can decide to incorporate an incorporated trustee. Remember, it's for non-profit. So the ideal business in this kind of structure is not to make money. It's just to run the business. It's just to run the affairs of the organization. Which affairs the CAC will have to know. of course. And then, of course, like I said, even you can own properties, you can own anything under the incorporated trustee. However, remember, it is for non-profit, okay, for the benefits of what the organization was established for. Now, so these are the different structures. Okay, we've gone through the different structures of this business, we've gone through the business structures, okay, of everything that is required under the CSC, maybe to incorporate a company or to even incorporate an organization. Like the incorporated trustee can be referred to an organization, not a company, really, but we put them under the business structures that you can incorporate under the CSC, under the CAMA, okay, in line with CSC, the Corporate Affairs Commission. So all of this, can be done, through, you can, of course, getting into things like this, you really need the right guidance, okay, so that whatever maybe incorporation structure you may want to put in, you can put it from the foundation so that you can build on it eventually. So, and then another thing also we're going to be looking at is the CSC, the post-incorporation compliance that you may have. Now, there are a lot of post-incorporation compliance that businesses will have to have. I have less than 5 minutes, and I hope I could finish before the 5 minutes, but I would have to, go through the major. Now, there are a lot of compliance that businesses may have to face, okay? May have to do, after incorporation. So once you've incorporated your business, it doesn't mean that that is all of it. There are some other things that you have to do continually, okay, to having that business in continue, okay, over time. Now, the first things first is like, for example, just like in Nigeria, we have it. There are some things that you may have to do, but they would have to help. They will want to ask you to get them. It's like a checkmate. For example, you want to, after you're done with incorporation, you want to open a bank account for the business, right? But while you're opening the bank account, the banks are asking you for this. So in other words, it's a way of them checkmating the system. So I'm going to start with that, and then from there we'll also continue. For instance, let's suppose you incorporated a business on maybe a real estate firm, and then you would want to open up a bank account. Now, firstly, the bank will ask you for a TIN, so you have to have a TIN, tax identification number, and then of course you can even take it higher to also fully register with the Federal Inland Revenue Service, or with the Inland Revenue Service in your state, so that you can actually get to file your taxes and do everything that has to do with any kind of tax you may have to pay depending on your business. And then secondly, they would ask you for, maybe depending on the business, actually, they may ask you for a SCUMO, the money laundering certificate, the anti-money laundering certificate that they usually will ask for businesses. You may have to provide that as well. And then you may have to also provide, maybe if you are a certain kind of business, maybe well, the banks may not ask you for this anyway, but looking at these two are major for rather opening up a bank account for most businesses. There's some other ones, maybe if the sector you are in is towards the food and drug sector, they will ask you for a NAFDAC license, you see, or maybe you are under the telecommunications sector. They'll ask you for the NCC license, that permits you to do this kind of business, or any kind of industry that you are in. There is a certain kind of license that your business should have. And then, of course, with the CSC too, your incorporation is not the end. There are things you also have to do with the CSC, like filing of annual return. Maybe you want to change directors, you want to change shareholders, all of these things. You can still do that, with the CSC. You can file all of those things with the CSC. And most of them are, of course, you really would have to follow the guidelines according to the CAMA. Okay, not knowing them, if you don't know them, you may have to pay penalties, okay, for when you now want to now file. Maybe, for example, imagine someone who files an annual return of this year, or rather, maybe annual return of last year or last 2 years. Maybe imagine someone who has not filed annual return of 2 years ago. That means you're already late. In other words, you're going to pay penalty fees and then still file it. So things like this happen. Okay, so it's good that you have the right guidance so that you can actually do the right, the right thing. Staying compliant is very important. The right thing at the right time, so you won't go into paying penalties and some other things. So there are different kinds of compliances that you should have. The most important one, the one that has to do with your industry, the one that has to do with opening up a bank account, the one that has to do with all other things you may have to do with some government organizations and even clients too. They want to know that you are actually you actually have the various documentation, licensing that you need to do what you need to do. So very, very important. And then another thing also we're going to be looking at is, okay, we've talked about the regulatory statutory compliances that does not have to do with CSA. So remember, like I told you, the one that has to do with your organization, the sector where you do business. Now we basically have 1 minute, okay, left. So we're going to look at the next one. We're going to look at how a foreigner can incorporate a business in Nigeria. Now, in a scale of preference, the first one is, first of all, no matter the business, actually, no matter the business, whether private company, limited by shares, or maybe you want to go public, but we're going to look at the step by step. First of all, is for you to choose a company name. Of course, do all the incorporation with the CSC. Okay, once you have done that, once you've been incorporated with the CAC, the next thing is for you to register with the Nigerian Investment Promotion Commission, the NIPC. Now, of course, there are a lot of benefits you would have with this. Okay, every foreigner must register with the NIPC to doing business in Nigeria. Okay, because there are some permits you need to get from the NIPC, which we'll discuss in another video, not today. Then, of course, another one is also apply for business permit and expatriate quota. Okay, from the Ministry of Interior. Now, of course, for you to do business in Nigeria, you need a permit for that, right? And at the same time, maybe the employees, the employees may have to come to Nigeria, so you also need that as well for them. You register with the Federal Inland Revenue Service for TIN, VAT, PE, and the rest of them. Then, of course, open a corporate account in Nigeria, obtain the required sectorial license. Now, one of it is maybe if you want to repatriate your money from your country to Nigeria, you need to obtain that certificate, okay, from the Central Bank of Nigeria to repatriate all the cash, maybe in dollars or whatever currency in Nigeria. And then, of course, all of that things afterwards, filing out annual return and the rest. A Nigerian resident director is not mandated, but okay, helpful for local operations. Now, one of that beautiful thing you can do as a foreigner, as a foreign investor, is also to bring in Nigeria, as a partner of that maybe as a shareholder or as maybe a partner with you for that company. It will help to go a long way to helping you, in the various incorporations. Okay. However, if you still want to run it as a foreigner, it's still possible. It doesn't mean that you can't still do it. Subsidiary. So compliance with CAC, CARMA, FRS, immigration and data laws is critical. Now, depending on the sector anyway, okay, depending on the sector anyway, but the most important thing is your registration with the CARMA, with CAC, your registration with NIPC, your registration, your permits you need to get it from the central bank, and then some of that sector, particular sectors that you are trying to do business in, very, very important you get that. And then, of course, the expatriate quota too, okay, which is very, very important. All right, so these are actually, in a nutshell, what we have okay, to share with you in today's webinar. We've exceeded 30 minutes anyway, but a little bit beyond 30 minutes. Okay, but I hope you found this video helpful. Okay, try to follow us, like, okay, comment, share. Let's know how this business, and you can contact us with any of the details on this video. Okay, let's help and guide you to be compliant. Let's give you an informed decision, and even think about it. A lot of businesses, a lot of people, that legal maybe solving any kind of legal problem that you may have gotten yourself involved with. Okay, we are here to helping you do that. Okay, so thank you for joining today's webinar, and we'll meet you in the next. Thank you.